CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Li Jianhua. Welcome to the program. Our top stories this hour. Russia accuses Ukraine of attacking its territory and killing 2 civilians. An anti-Kremlin paramilitary group disputes the accusation. Defense chiefs and military officials from across the world are gathering in Singapore for Asia's top security summit. Averting catastrophic default, the U.S. debt ceiling bill is pushed through Congress, ready for President Biden to sign. And ministers from the so-called BRICS countries call for a rebalancing of the world order away from the West. Moscow says 2 people have been killed in the Russian border region of Belgorod when the car they were driving was hit by debris from Ukrainian shells. Defense chiefs say 3 cross-border attacks were intercepted overnight, accusing Ukraine of using terrorist formations against civilian targets. Kiev has yet to comment on the claims. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it shot down over 30 Russian missiles and drones over its capital after 3 people, including a child, were killed in the attacks on Thursday. Let's speak to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, what more has Moscow said about these strikes in Belgorod?
Well, as well as those 2 killed, there were 2 injured, they say, and this was all part of a shelling campaign which the Russian Ministry of Defense says has been lasting around these border regions of Belgorod for over 48 hours now, seemingly part of a coordinated attempt to also allow land-based forces coming from Ukraine to try once again to cross over the border. Now, while Russia is denying reports that a third border incursion took place on Friday, it has reported more detail on what happened on Thursday when it says it successfully repelled, before they crossed the border, another, quote, Ukrainian saboteur and reconnaissance group. The same formation which labels itself the Free Russia Legion and also the Russian Volunteer Corps, self-styled Russians and Belarusians fighting to, quote, liberate Russia. They are part of this attempt, it seems, this change in tactics to try and prod at the border of Russia, not just push back Russian forces in what's internationally recognized as Ukraine. Now, when it comes to the shelling, that on itself isn't new. These border regions have experienced shelling, have been in a high state of alert for over a year now. But what is new is seemingly this going along with drone strikes across border regions against oil and energy facilities, as well as the possibility of land forces moving across.
And still, the U.S. is reportedly making a new offer to Moscow over their nuclear weapons agreement.
Yeah, that's right. According to some senior U.S. officials, the United States is going to try to offer an agreement separate to the New START treaty, which is effectively suspended, which was decided by Russia and reciprocated by the United States earlier in the year. This focus allegedly would be about the number of deployable nuclear warheads. Now, the New START treaty prevents the number over a certain limit. The US is interested in agreeing with Russia that even after the New START treaty expires in 2026, if they can't agree to renew the treaty in full, at least agree to that limit on the number of deployable nuclear warheads. That comes as this month the United States enters its reciprocation with Russia's withdrawal or Russia's refusal to allow weapons inspectors into the country, and the information sharing agreement. So now the US is not sharing information with Russia in the same way Russia is not sharing information with the US when it comes to nuclear weapons. Russia says it's open to discussing the possibility of renewing the New START treaty or talking about nuclear issues in general, only when the United States changes its, quote, volatile course of action against Russia.
Thank you very much. That is our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. And China's Special Envoy for Eurasian Affairs, Li Hui, says he believes neither Ukraine nor Russia have firmly shut the door to talks. Li spoke to journalists in Beijing following a six-leg European tour that took him to Ukraine, Poland, France, Germany, Belgium and Russia. During the trip, he met leaders and top diplomats exploring options for a truce in Ukraine and possible long-term solutions to the conflict. Our correspondent Dong Xue is in Beijing. Dong Xue, great to see you. So, what's Li Hui's message at the press briefing?
Well, Jianhua, over the course of 2 hours, China's Special Envoy for Eurasian Affairs, Li Hui, briefed the media about his recent 12-day European tour that took him, as you mentioned earlier, to Ukraine, Poland, France, Germany, Belgium and Russia on a mission to make clear Beijing's position on the Ukraine crisis. Well, Ambassador Li started off with some personal feelings. As we know, he was China's envoy to Russia from 2009 and 2019, but said things definitely felt different this time around, given the differences in his mission. He said the European officials he spoke to hold a positive view of China's efforts to resolve the conflict and that China's peace plan was well received. And he warned the risk of escalation of conflict in Ukraine remains high, calling for all sides to take concrete measures to ease tensions, guarantee the safety of nuclear facilities, as well as to prevent escalating the humanitarian crisis. He went on and said, I quote, as long as it is conducive to easing the situation, China is willing to do anything. China is a neutral party in the conflict and believes negotiations are the only way out. Li then described China's position as objective and impartial based on his talks with both Russian and Ukrainian officials. He said the former reaffirmed that Moscow has never opposed peace talks, while officials in Kyiv said they cherish and long for peace. Li said, and I quote, what must stop is sending weapons to the battlefield. Otherwise, the situation will only continue to spiral. Well, China always believes in negotiations and the promotion of peace will eventually succeed. Well, finally, Li reiterated this is the first time China has ever sent representatives to promote the peace plan and that Beijing will continue to work to bring both sides to the negotiation tables. Take a listen. Briefing the media on Friday about the outcome of his recent European tour, China's Special Envoy of Eurasian Affairs, Li Hui, said Beijing's position on Ukraine is objective, impartial, and has received praise from the international community. In May, Li visited Kyiv, Warsaw, Paris, Berlin, Brussels, and Moscow on the whirlwind 12-day tour in a bid to promote Beijing's 12-point peace plan to solve the conflict in Ukraine. He said both Russia and Ukraine have publicly acknowledged China's efforts, even as serious differences remain between Kyiv and Moscow.
The risk of escalation of the Russia-Ukraine conflict is still high. All sides must take concrete measures to cool down the situation and ensure the safety of nuclear facilities. As long as it is conducive to easing the situation, China is willing to do anything.
Li used to be the ambassador to Russia from 2009 to 2019 and is the most senior Chinese official to visit Ukraine since the conflict escalated in 2022. He said China is a neutral party in the conflict and believes negotiations are the only way out.
The Russian side said it has never opposed peace talks, while Ukraine said it cherishes and longs for peace. What must stop is sending weapons to the battlefield. Otherwise, the situation will only continue to spiral. China always believes in negotiations and the promotion of peace will eventually succeed.
During your meeting with the top Ukrainian officials, you were quoted in the media as saying that all parties involved in the conflict need to start from themselves. But as we've seen, no one between Ukraine and Russia wants to budge. So what do you think is the minimum that Ukraine and Russia need to do to initiate the restarting of the peace talks? And also, what can China do further to make the two sides come to the table?
Generally speaking, the Ukrainian crisis is now at a critical juncture and there's still a wide gap between the positions of the two sides. China will continue to strengthen dialogue and exchanges among all parties, build consensus, gain mutual trust, and continue to make contributions to the political settlement of the Ukrainian crisis.
That is our reporter Dong Xue in Beijing. The United States has imposed the sanctions on businesses it accuses of fueling the conflict in Sudan. Washington said it was targeting 2 companies linked to the army and 2 others linked to the rival Rapid Support Forces. The US and Saudi Arabia have been leading negotiation efforts to secure an effective ceasefire in the country. Parts of China continue to swelter under a prolonged heat wave. Temperatures in some southern and eastern regions are set to top 40 degrees in the coming days, with the extreme heat forecast to continue through June, putting a strain on the country's power grid. A few days ago, Shanghai experienced its hottest day. Japan's birth rate has hit a new record low, falling for the 7th consecutive year in 2022. The government is looking at ways to reverse the trend, with a plan to spend billions of dollars on childcare and other measures to support parents. The pandemic has worsened the country's demographic problems, causing more deaths and leading to fewer marriages and births. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. US President Joe Biden is set to sign the debt ceiling bill after its safe passage through the Senate.
Roger, making loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome! We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
This week on Razor, the mysteries of antimatter.
Hydrogen is the most common element in the universe, the simplest thing. It's the only antimatter atom that we conceive of building. And we learned back in the early 2000s how to put it together here in this building.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Russia accuses Ukraine of attacking its territory and killing 2 civilians. An anti-Kremlin paramilitary group disputes the claim. And defense chiefs and military officials from across the globe are in Singapore for Asia's top security summit. The US summit has managed to avoid a catastrophic federal default just days before the June the 5th deadline. Senators raced to pass the debt ceiling bill on Thursday night, and now President Joe Biden is set to sign it into law. Let's speak to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, no drama in the Senate. Was it a surprise that the Congress passed the bill within such a tight time frame? How was it done?
Well, there was drama in the Senate, and, it could have gone a lot longer, as I said yesterday. In the end, they worked very hard to bring this home in a 24-hour period. But there was a marathon late-night session that went till at least 11 o'clock in Washington, D.C. on Thursday night, with plenty of amendments being tabled, but they were voted down just as well, too, because if they'd been voted through, they would have had to send the whole thing back to the House of Representatives. So in return, senators who were very angry were given the chance to speak on the floor. And they were angry about the restrictions being applied to getting food stamps, the relaxing of restrictions on oil drilling, angry at the reduction of money for the taxman, and also the resumption of student loan payments. There'd been a moratorium on that. And from the right, just anger that the whole thing doesn't go far enough when it comes to cutting spending. Now, in the end, you can think of it like this. The greater good basically prevailed, because although there could have been a rebellion in the Senate last night, well, there wasn't. Plus the fact And I've said this several times in the past, the Senate always backs itself up against a major public holiday or a weekend. It did the same yesterday, and senators simply want to go away for their weekend. It is as simple as that. So when they were asked to bring the motion to the floor, 100 of them said yes, and from that moment on, we knew that the deal was going through. President Biden says he'll sign it as soon as it crosses his desk today. And this brings to an end, Lee, a 6-month saga which has been going on. The debt ceiling agenda is now off the agenda completely for another 2 years until 2025, and it's being seen as a victory for Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, a Republican, and President Biden, representing the Democrats, who it is being seen here as a victory for them over the hard left and the hard right in their parties.
Lee? John, how is the market reacting to it?
Well, this morning when we came in, it's just after 10 o'clock in the morning now. When we came in about 7 this morning, the markets were sharply up because of the debt ceiling and the fact it will be signed into law and the fact that that issue has gone away for 2 years. And then we had the May jobs report at about 8:30 local time. But oddly enough, it has spiked the markets. But let me just very briefly tell you what happened here. We were expecting 200,000 jobs to be created in the month of May. We got 339,000. That's 139,000 more. This seems to stave off the chances of the Federal Reserve pausing on interest rates when they meet in a couple of weeks' time. It's very difficult to say one way or the other. There's lots of data I could give you, but basically the next big interest rate decision is the 13th and the 14th of June. On the 13th, they get crucial CPI, which is inflation data. That will certainly help. In these figures today, really something for everybody. You know, the headline figure of 339, but other elements of it suggest that the economy really is slowing. So the smart money is still on a pause, despite this jobs data on the 14th of June. The Dow shot up as soon as the news came out. It's now even higher. 418 points to the good. It had been up 140 before the news came out, and government bond interest yields are also significantly up. So once again, key data leaves us, you know, hanging in the balance and asking many questions.
Hanging in the balance, that is. Thank you very much. That is our correspondent, John Terrace, in New York. Foreign ministers from the so-called BRICS group of nations are meeting in South Africa in a push to establish themselves as more of a counterweight to the West. China, Brazil, Russia, India and South Africa are also discussing whether to allow other countries to join the group. Our correspondent, Julie Shire, reports.
Foreign ministers from Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa met ahead of the BRICS summit being held in Johannesburg in August. Discussions were dominated by the bloc's expansion to include more developing countries.
BRICS symbolizes the evolution of the multipolar world, which is talked about very often and more so. And the attraction to more than a dozen countries of BRICS is a testimony to that.
Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Algeria, the United Arab Emirates and Bangladesh have all made a serious play to join the group amid heightened political tensions and deepening inequality.
It's a work in progress. We have to advise our presidents for the coming summit in August in Johannesburg, and we are still studying. We discussed a number of different standards that would or issues that should be put into this discussion.
One part of it is actually to consolidate how the existing BRICS members are working with each other. The second part of it is how the BRICS engages non-BRICS countries. And the third part of it is how we look at potential expansion.
BRICS started out as a group of the fastest growing emerging markets almost 20 years ago, but it's rapidly growing as an economic and political force taking on Western domination.
They are building exclusive circles and trying to suppress and contain the development of China and other developing countries. Essentially, they do not wish to allow the developing countries to achieve development or economic prosperity. This is in sharp contrast with what BRICS is doing to be self-strengthening.
Had one of the senior executives of the new development bank briefing our meeting on work that the bank has been doing, looking at the potential use of alternative currencies to the current internationally traded currencies.
The 5 ministers agreed to deepen cooperation and trade with Africa. They also strengthened their stance on multilateralism and reform of the United Nations Security Council to give developing countries a greater say in global affairs. Julie Shar, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Cases of dengue fever are on the rise in Southeast Asia. The World Health Organization estimates there are up to 400 million infections each year transmitted to humans by mosquitoes. Symptoms can be severe and a small number of cases prove fatal. Now, scientists in Malaysia are trying to breed a new type of mosquito, which they hope will replace the disease-carrying variety. Our correspondent Brian Meltzer reports.
Releasing ravenous mosquitoes into densely populated apartment blocks may seem reckless. But these mosquitoes are bred in a lab and infected with a bacteria called Wolbachia. And that means they can't spread diseases like dengue or Zika.
The goal of the program is to replace the bad mosquitoes in the field with the good mosquitoes. We want the mosquitoes to mate with the wild mosquitoes. When the female Aedes Wolbachia mosquito, when she mates with the wild, all her progeny will be Wolbachia. When the male Wolbachia mates with the female in the wild, the eggs will not hatch.
Malaysia is the first country with endemic dengue to use this approach.
There is a locality where we have released for at least 5 months, and more than 95% of the mosquitoes in that area was converted into Wolbachia mosquitoes. In some localities, compared to previously, the cases was high, but after that, after Wolbachia release, it reduced 100%. But on average, it's from 40 to 100% reduction of dengue cases.
There are some outbreaks, but we are very controlled. It's not like what happened before. We feel that every localities that we introduce Wolbachia, at some point, maybe after 2 or 3 years, we can stop releasing and we can sustain the program. Yeah, so in other words, all these localities, we no longer have to go do space spraying, yeah? And we don't need to spend too much time and resources to do vector control.
This year, countries across Southeast Asia have seen a several-fold increase in dengue cases and deaths. And scientists warn that increased urban density coupled with climate change will only worsen that threat in future. The breeding facility at Kuala Lumpur's Medical Research Institute is supplying Wolbachia-infected eggs to facilities across Malaysia, enabling them to rear and release their own good mosquitoes. And other countries fighting dengue and Zika are watching Malaysia's Wolbachia program with interest. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
A Beijing professor who specializes in spacecraft dynamics and aerospace control technology has become the first Chinese payload specialist and civilian astronaut to enter space. 36-year-old Gui Haichao successfully made it to the China space station as part of the Shenzhou 16 crew, which was launched earlier this week. Swing Ye has more.
The Shenzhou 16 crew who starts their journey from here are responsible for the first manned space mission since China's space station entered long-term operation.
It's the first time that a Shenzhou crew is made up of a pilot, a flight engineer, and a payload specialist. Gui Haichao, who is a professor with Beihang University, is the payload specialist who's making the cut, made so many across China enthused. Here is what Gui said, what his job involves.
This role is mainly taking responsibility for the operation management, maintenance, and repair of the space station's payload. There is carrying out various scientific experiments and tests, as well as collecting, organizing, and analysis of experimental data and results.
That and more, as each of the Shenzhou crew could be one another's backup or to take over one another's job when needed. A payload specialist is also trained for spacecraft management, maintenance, spacewalks, and all relevant activities. Gui is the first in a long line of payload specialists heading to the National Space Lab. In the third batch of Chinese taikonauts selected in 2020, 7 are pilots, 7 are flight engineers, and 4 are payload specialists, including him. And in the selection for the fourth batch of Chinese taikonauts currently underway, the goal is to pick 12 to 14 candidates. Among them, 7 to 8 will be pilots, 3 to 4 will be flight engineers, and 2 will be payload specialists. According to China Manned Space Agency, those payload specialists will be chosen from scientists working on space science and technology. So more taikonauts will be on board the China Space Station like Gui. 孙烨 CGTN 九泉.
Well, for those who can't make it to outer space, there is an intergalactic-themed bed and breakfast here on Earth. Our correspondent Li Jing has the story from the central Chinese city of Wuhan.
Zhang Hongjun is a local resident of Wuhan with a passion for astronomy. The recent launch of the Shenzhou 16 crew made him feel especially excited, and in response, he decided to spend time at the city's space-themed hotel.
I'm always fascinated by things about space, such as spacecraft and rockets. When the Shenzhou 16 crew had a successful launch, I really wanted to get a taste of space through this hotel.
Located in Qingyangzhai, a tourist spot in Wuhan's district of Huangpi, Shuying Xingxin B&B looks just like a space base. The rooms have been designed to resemble capsules and are named after 9 planets. The towering crescent moon, brave astronauts, the rocket, and futuristic design help people live out their science fiction dreams.
Lying in bed, one can enjoy the magnificent scenery through the 270-degree floor-to-ceiling windows by looking up at the vast starry sky. The space elements, such as rockets, moon, and astronauts, attract a lot of astronomy enthusiasts.
Annie is from Pakistan and found a hotel on the internet. She's brought her son here on holiday and says she's pleasantly surprised by the balcony, pool, flowers and wine, as well as the space capsule rooms.
I'm from Pakistan. I really love this hotel, so I brought my son here to enjoy it.
The popularity of the hotel comes as China reaches new heights in its space program, and it may just kindle the curiosity of those who could one day contribute. Li Jing for CGTN from Wuhan.
Our headlines again. Russia accuses Ukraine of attacking its territory and killing 2 civilians. An anti-Kremlin paramilitary group disputes the accusation. Defense chiefs and military officials from across the world are gathering in Singapore for Asia's top security summit. And averting catastrophic default, the U.S. debt ceiling bill is pushed through Congress, ready for President Joe Biden to sign. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. There is more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next is World Insights with Tian Wei. For now, from all the team in London, that's goodbye.
This is CGTN.